I am with Dr. Marshall Goldsmith, one of my heroes, somebody I've been lucky enough to be coached by, mentored by, encouraged by. For the few people who don't know who you are, you've been ranked numerous times the world's #1 leadership thinker. You have numerous awards named after you. That's something. You're the author of many books, including some New York Times bestsellers. And in fact, I want to ask you about that.
Sure.
The first time we met, 20 years ago, I was even less well-known than I am now. You were well-known. And I persuaded you to come on a webinar. And after we did the webinar together, we were talking, and you said, "Hey, Michael, here's something you need to know. I've sold millions of copies of my books. But the truth is, I've written 20 books at that time. You've written more now, I know. I've written 20 books, and 2 or 3 of those have been almost entirely responsible for the millions of copies I've sold."
Right.
And I was like, that's amazing, because that means 20 books, 3 of which have been gangbuster successes, 17, not so much.
Yeah. Purchased by my mother, my father, and relatives.
Right. So I'm curious to know how you hold success and failure. How do you see them? What do you learn from them? Why do you keep writing books? Why do you keep throwing stuff out into the world?
Well, I think the important point is to keep trying.
Right.
And the reality is you don't know always how things are going to work out. I know what I think is good in my mind.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that's going to resonate with the rest of the world.
Right.
And so I think it's very healthy to keep trying and not to coast.
Right.
What happened is, in my world, I see many people who are successful and make a lot of money, and they kind of let it go to their head.
Right.
And they think, well, I know the answer. Well, you know, that answer gets a little old after 20 years.
Yeah.
And you really need to go back and keep reminding yourself to start over. I'm writing a new book now called The Earned Life, speaking of new books. And in our book, we talk about the importance of every day reinventing yourself and your legacy. If you don't, you're just becoming used to be.
Right.
Didn't you used to be the guy that wrote those books? Didn't you used to have a good book? And didn't you used to have good ideas?
Right.
Well, you become this used to be. So I think it's very important as we journey through life and to constantly challenge ourselves with new and different ways of thinking, and also realize they're not all going to win.
Right.
And it's okay.
So how do you manage what you could easily label as failure? You write a book, you put it out in the world, it doesn't sell very much, it doesn't get any attention. Some people go, "Marshall, this is a terrible book. Why did you even write this?" How do you manage that? How does it not dent your self-esteem?
Well, usually by that point in time, by the time the book has actually been published and out there,
Right.
I'm already well on to the next one anyway. I'm already kind of moving on.
So part of it is keep moving.
Just keep moving. And the other thing is, hey, people have a right to their own opinions.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not a religious, but a philosophical Buddhist, and Buddhists said only do what I teach if it works for you. Right. Well, I may have an idea that works for a few people, but doesn't work for a lot of people.
Right.
Doesn't inherently mean it's a good or bad idea, it just didn't work for people. Yeah. Sometimes you write a book, it works for people, doesn't work for other people. Most of them don't work.
Nice. What I noticed in what you're saying is a couple of things. First of all, most of them don't work.
Right.
It reminds me of the Jim Collins metaphor it wasn't from good to great, it's from one of his other books that sound like good to great. And he says, look, the way you experiment for a strategy, and it's not a bad life philosophy, is you fire bullets and you fire cannonballs.
Right.
And you start off by firing bullets because they're relatively cheap experiments to figure out where the real target is.
Right.
And then when you find what the real target is, you commit to the cannonball.
Right.
And he said, look, most people don't fire enough bullets.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, I don't want to use up my bullets, I don't want to fail, I don't want to miss the target. Or they take their one cannonball and they fire it too early.
Right.
And what I hear in you doing is you're like, you fire bullets. And you're like, sometimes they hit, sometimes they don't hit. And whether they do or not, it's actually not about me. It's just about the project. So you don't seem to take it personally.
And also, all I can do is my best and share what I think is good for people. And I'm a human just like anybody else. And sometimes I come up with ideas that don't work for some. Maybe sometimes come up with just dumb ideas. Well, that's okay.
Right.
That's okay. All great entrepreneurs fail.
I
I see myself as a thinker, more like an entrepreneurial thinker, though.
Right. I mean, you've said when we've talked before, you're like, you know, as you approach the end of your career, you're like, I've had 3 good ideas.
Right.
You know, one is the Feed Forward idea, one is the Marshall Goldsmith 100 group, which I'm part of.
Right.
I can't remember what the third one is.
Coaching.
Oh, it's just, okay, yeah, perfect. So part of what's amazing about that is to have 3 legacy ideas out in the world. I mean, that's pretty impressive, right?
That's right.
But it also means that you've launched other things that have been a little less obvious, been a little less of a success, and you've gone, that's fascinating, move on, what's my next big idea?
Move on. And, I've had my myriad dumb ideas and done myriad dumb things.
Yeah.
That's okay.
And with the Marshall Goldsmith 100, when you first introduced that to the world, I think it was the Marshall Goldsmith 15. And then you went, actually, let's make it 25.
Right.
Actually, this is a good idea. Let's make it 100. Actually, let's find if we can do the young 100. And it's like, and it's a perfect example of firing bullets and then firing a cannonball. You're like, you know what? There's something magical about creating this community of leaders and thinkers and coaches.
Right.
Let's double down. Let's expand the idea. Let's get excited about it. It's wonderful role modeling. Thank you, Marshall.
So much.